Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. This is show 56. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt. And Matt, I know we had a great show 55, talking a lot about the coaching profession, and I'd mentioned in the closing remarks how excited I was how it was going to bridge the here in show 56 where we talk dad coaches. But first, let me say thank you, Chris Good Health Chiropractic Center, and all his support supporting our YouTube channel. If you're on our podcast app there, check us out on YouTube, SVC Sports Zone. If you're over on the YouTube side, you can obviously find our audio wherever you find your podcast. So, Matt, as we get going here on Expanding the Zone show 56, and we're talking dad coaches, I know you and I are big podcast listeners, and there's one of your favorite that you've had me listening to a little bit here, and there was a recent uh, show on this particular podcast that kind of generated this topic. So I'll kind of throw it over to you as I say welcome and let you kind of set the stage here for show 56.
Yeah, Shayne, we talk a lot about how you and I listen to podcasts all the time, right? For professional development or learning or whatever. And one that I listen to, and it's partly entertainment, but it's also, I think, a learning type of podcast is the Hank Haney podcast, dealing with golf mainly, but he talks a little bit about, he was a golf coach, and he talks about, still is a golf coach, and talks about, coaching topics and things like that from time to time. And, talks about golf instruction, which can help your game a little bit. So all these reasons, right? I listen to this on May 30th, and I would encourage people after they listen to this show, if they want to go back and hear his, on May 30th, the May 30th episode, he had an episode he called Dad Coach, like what we're kind of calling this one tonight. And he basically was talking about youth coaches and dads that coach their own kids. Okay. And he was, basically the way this started was Hank Haney, for those people that don't know, and I'll hit you with a little bit of background here. Hank Haney he's a Hall of Fame golf coach. Okay. He's in his late 60s. He's been a golf coach for 40 years. He was a college coach at SMU, but then he became an individual golf instructor, ended up being Tiger Woods' golf coach for several years, was Mark Amara's golf coach. So he's got this background, obviously. He has a son. Now, like I said, he was in his mid to late 60s. He oddly enough has a son who's 10. Okay. And his son has become a really good youth hockey player. And they go all over the country for tournaments. He said he was in a tournament in Edmonton, he was in a tournament. And so he goes out of the country, a tournament in Boston, a tournament in Toronto. He's talking about all these tournaments he goes to, right? But he got to talking about some of the coaches over the years that his son has had, some of the situations where he sees people try to be a coach who aren't a coach. And it was an entertaining, podcast, but also kind of got me thinking, wow, we see a lot of coaches, right, that coach youth sports, that maybe don't have a background in coaching, but they either kind of get roped into it because we need volunteers, we need people to coach, whatever. They coach their own kids a lot. What issues, some of these issues Hank Haney was talking about, do we see some of these same things? And I'll say Hank Haney in this podcast was kind of critical of these types of coaches. And I thought at times, I'll be honest with you, as much as I like him and his show, at times maybe even a little unfair, Shayne. But as a whole, I thought there were some interesting talking points that maybe you and I can kick back and forth tonight, just about dads coaching. I know this could be moms too. I guess we're kind of being, we're not maybe being open-minded enough, because we've seen some moms coach their kids too, right? But parents coaching their own kids, parents volunteering to coach youth sports. What are some of the positives? What are some of the issues we see? We just thought it might be an interesting topic to kick around.
Yeah, I guess, as I've started to listen to some of the different episodes, I don't know that I've listened to it certainly haven't listened to it as long as you or as frequently as you. But this was an interesting show. The unfair word certainly was something I put in my notes. Very arrogant, and very, he entertaining. Yes. I think what happens for me is when I'm able to listen to it as a fan, I think it's very entertaining. I think what happens to me is I can never take off my coaching hat. It seems like I always come back to that. And it kind of takes me back to last week's show 55, where coaching's not easy.
Right.
Coaching's hard. And I think there has to be a little bit more respect for people who are trying it. And the first thing that jumped out at me is setting a culture of developmental sports, saying what you want about moms and dads getting involved in coaching. I don't know the realistic expectation of having those levels without them. So I think what we're going to contradict here throughout the show a little bit is what are the positives and negatives of having the parents involved. But I think on the positive side that I'll throw at you right off the bat is someone who was a head coach for 20 years. I know in my career, Matt, I've made almost 2 decades of being a head coach of baseball now. But let's face it, little league baseball is more of a community based thing. Does have a lot of parent involvement. Again, I don't know how you would have it without it. Where in the basketball side of things, I would argue I probably have a little bit more skill and talent in terms of just natural talent of coaching the game of basketball than even I do in baseball. But I found my niche more in probably 80% of my career as an assistant coach. And I'll just be completely transparent in terms of looking myself in the mirror. One of the things I've ultimately struggled with being a head coach in basketball is the developmental stages of developing a little league program, developing junior high, having coaches and different things. So I guess what I would throw back to you is no matter where we go with this topic tonight, don't we agree that we're not all talking about having a 10-year-old son who's playing these sports at this particular level? Most of our little league is our basic everyday small town USA, little league baseball, some little league basketball, maybe getting into some AAU basketball, some travel and so forth as you get older. But am I missing something when I say that the first thing we better understand is without the parent involvement, I'm not sure how any of these younger levels of development would even be possible. Is that fair?
Oh, definitely fair. And that's one of the first things that jumped out when I was listening to this podcast. I felt like Hank Haney, maybe in his world, where you're a Hall of Fame level coach, obviously very affluent, a lot of money. His kids playing soccer all over the country. So obviously they got a lot of money. They're traveling around. He's on an elite soccer team that probably does have great coaching at that level. I think he's disconnected, honestly, is what I would tell him if I was talking to him face to face. Is like, man, listen, it's been too long since you've been in some small high school in rural Southern Ohio, bud. I mean, this isn't the way it works. We have to have volunteers, Shayne. I mean, these programs don't survive. And let's be real honest, we it takes a lot of effort and time for these people to volunteer. They are giving a lot of themselves when they volunteer. I've coached youth baseball and youth basketball now, and it takes time. It is a commitment. Okay. And sometimes parents coach because there's nobody else to do it. Right. That happens sometimes. It's kind of the old saying of like, how did you become the booster president? Well, I wasn't at the meeting to defend myself. You know what I mean? And the next thing I know, I'm the booster
Yeah.
president, right? Some of these people don't even want to coach, but they kind of feel like, for me, I'll give you a prime example. I've coached my now, I guess now he's what, gosh, I should kind of know. He's 11, year old son since he's been little. And it seems like every year I've coached him in basketball. Why? Well, because the people that run that program know that I have a lot of experience coaching basketball, so they want me to coach. And then, you know, I feel obligated because I feel like I have something to offer these kids and I can run a quality practice because of all the years I've done it, right? And I almost feel guilty if I don't share with them what I know. Would I rather sit in the stands with my wife and just kind of watch the game? Yeah, to be honest, I probably would, my son's playing flag football right now, and I'm so happy that I'm not coaching because I told him the other night, I said, Brogan, you need to hear other voices than mine. I mean, I don't want you only coached by me. I want you coached by other people. You'll like some of them. You won't like some of them. That's life. I don't want to be your coach on everything you do. But because of my experience in coaching, I kind of get roped into it, if that makes sense. So I'm coaching basketball, and then, you know, same way with baseball. I have a little bit of experience. I used to coach high school baseball, and, so I have some experience there on how to run a practice. And to be honest with you, I saw some practices when they were little, and I thought, oh my goodness, these practices are so bad. And we could talk a little bit about that. And again, I'm not trying to be critical. They're just really bad practices because people just didn't know how to coach. They'd never been coaches. So then you feel obligated, Shayne, to help. So yes, one, you have to have volunteers for this to work. And two, keep in mind, some of these volunteers that you might think, gosh, they're not very good, they may not want to be doing it anyway. They may just been the only person left. So yeah, I think it's okay. I think it's okay, Shayne, to have an honest conversation. Let's start there. Okay. It's okay to have an honest conversation on this show. All right. But we also want to be fair. I think we're going to be constructively critical at times in the show tonight, but let's also start by being fair and saying a lot of these people are doing the best they can in a situation where we need them.
No question. So I guess I'll ask you, where do you want to start? Because like I said, I know you've had more experience doing this than I have. We both listened to the show. And we both have some passionate opinions on this. Where do you want to start? Little League, AAU, the coaching in general, the profession? Kind of lead the way for me here.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we can start a number of different places. To me, I think that the first thing we need to look at is, and I think this is a little bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I think it's a huge misconception. I think people automatically think like coaching, anybody can coach. Anybody who's played can coach. Okay, like if I played. I mean, I was a good player, right? I was a good football player. I can coach football. Or I was a good golfer. I can coach golf. Whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a serious misconception. Okay. And I think people underestimate coaching as a profession. Like people underestimate the skill that it takes to coach, right? Like I don't think anybody would go to the dentist or come home from the dentist office and say, like, I could be a dental hygienist. I mean, just give me the scraper and the little, brush.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know what she does. People
Yeah.
probably think, you need a certain level of training on that. I think sometimes people take teaching and coaching for that matter a little bit lightly, as to say, well, yeah, I could do that. Anybody could do that. Right. And so I think we need to understand that coaching is like, there's a skill to coaching. Like, and it's a learned skill. People aren't born to be a coach. Okay. So it's a learned skill. And I think you and I probably found out early on, right, that just because you played the game, there's a whole different thing you got to learn, a whole different skill set to coaching the game. And I'm so thankful in my career because I've seen a lot of coaches fail at the high school level, Shayne, because they come right from college having been a player and they jump right into being a head coach. And when I see that, I just cringe. I'm thinking, man, you're setting that person up for disaster, because there's so much to learn that you can learn by being an assistant coach. I was so fortunate to be an assistant coach for 5-6 years before I became a head coach. And I even got to be an assistant coach under 2 different head coaches, which gave me even more knowledge base, right? Different philosophies. And what, when I became a head coach, I still wasn't ready, because there was more to learn then. You just talked on the last show, Shayne. I remember you making a comment that every year you pick out something to try to get better at, right? You've been coaching forever. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't you know it all by now? No. And I know the answer to that. You don't. And none of us do. You want to keep learning and keep getting better. So think about these coaches we're going to talk about in youth sports. They're not trained. First of all, let's be real honest. These coaches aren't trained to be coaches. They're not qualified to be coaches, if we're just being real, most of the time. Now, you'll run into some that, like in my situation where if I'm coaching 5th grade basketball, you can make an argument I'm qualified to do that, right? With all the years I've coached basketball. You'll have some people coaching youth football that a few years back maybe been a high school coach or they've had some background, but you're going to have a lot of people that aren't trained.
But again, real quick, if you're fortunate enough to have that, there's a good chance he or she has a son or daughter on the team.
Right. So right. So they're not only are they not trained, but they're also coaching their own kids, right? Which we can talk a little bit about those issues. Let me ask you this. I've always wondered why. And I think I don't know, we may jump around a little bit tonight, Shayne, which is fine, but I've always wondered why. And I used to try to do this a little bit at Benton County years ago. If you're going to have a youth program, say you're a head coach and you got a youth program, and let's just say, well, I'll just stick with basketball since that's what I know. But like, let's say you got a youth program and you're going to have 4 or 5 different head coaches in your youth program. When I say that, I mean like you're going to have a 3rd grade coach and a 4th grade coach and a 5th grade, right? Each grade level is going to have a coach. Why not have like a coaches clinic ran by the head coach that trains those coaches? Like, why don't we make any effort whatsoever to train those coaches? Now, I used to do this at Benton County we would at least call the coaches in for the first youth basketball meeting, and we would let them watch our practice, and we would go through drills, right? And we would show them what we're doing. And I would stop and I would talk like, hey, listen, here's what we're doing here. But wouldn't it be nice if we maybe took some time to train those coaches, Shayne?
Well, it really would, because if you think about it, I think a lot of people probably don't understand what goes into some coaching. And again, there's different things that maybe take place if it's more in a community little league type thing compared to an in-school little league type thing in terms of background checks and training classes and first aid and cardiac arrest and then pupil activity certificate. And different schools probably go about it differently in terms of their facilities. But I think the amount of time and money that go into just being allowed to volunteer is something to recognize in the first place. But like you said, once someone even gets to that point, there's not even really a direct training of the sport, so to speak. So you're right. When it comes time, I've said for years that the one thing that we don't get enough in our coaching profession is enough of just mentoring some of the younger coaches, or some of the, when I say younger coaches, just the ones that do not have the amount of experience and some of the different things,
Right.
sharing of a vision of a leader. If you're ahead of a program, having some of that consistency from the top down. But I think a lot of times what happens too is you branch away further from the top, it gets a little bit more independent. There's not really a vision in terms of what's to be taught, what's to be the mindset of winning and losing. We've talked a little bit about when the
Right.
scoreboard comes on, there's a
Mhm.
whole different mindset in terms of little league sports and some of those types of things. Um, in the travel scenario, I think you might look at a lot of individual base versus team base. What's the individual wanting to get out of it? Is winning involved in that? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So I think
Like
there's
like
a
ru-
lot of,
like running a practice. Like
yeah,
like 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 like
sure.
think about the time and effort, Shayne, it goes into running a practice. Like I
Hmm.
used to put no less than probably 45 minutes a day into my practice plan every day for my high school team,
Yeah.
right? And why is that? Because you want to maximize every minute of your practice. And how many times do you go to a little league baseball practice, okay? And 11 8-year-olds line up at shortstop and they hit him a ground ball, they field it, and they throw it to first. Then he goes to the end of the line. Now he's number 11. He's got to sit there and wait for 2, 3 minutes. Their attention span's terrible. They start picking dandelions, kicking dirt because but again, if you've never been trained to coach, you don't think, oh, wait a minute, maybe I should do 3 lines and maybe I should have this group over here doing this and this, especially if you have help. Sometimes you don't, but but see, that goes back to training. When you're trained as a coach, you understand that, Shayne. So I didn't want to interrupt you, but it's like all those examples you were given were great, right? But even just running a practice isn't easy for somebody who's never coached or doesn't understand what goes into that.
No, and listen, we live in a time of distraction. We live in a time of got to have it right now.
Right.
With cell phones and different things, you drive down the road and look to your left and right. There's a good chance you're going to see someone peek at their phone or some different things. And let's not all pretend like we at some point haven't looked down at our phone
Right.
or looked at different distractions and different things that you have. And it's that now. I've used the analogy before of, sometimes I love it when when my wife and I, she'll put the crock pot on, right? And you'll
Right.
smell that thing all day, and it's just you're ready for dinner. Whereas other times, man, the hustle bustle, you just pop something in the microwave for 4 minutes, have dinner at night. It it's a now. So when you're dealing with kids in the classroom, if you're a teacher, if you're a principal, if you're a coach, I mean, I don't know that you just walk in and do that at the level that it needs to be done. And the reason I can say that with confidence is because I've myself, as well as so many people I've watched have a ton of respect for, struggle to do it at times in terms of doing it at a successful level. So it is difficult. And the one thing I would say is this, like I'll use volleyball for an example here. Volleyball coaches are some of the most specialized coaches that I can, and maybe it's just in our area. Maybe this isn't the way it is around. I know we have a lot of people who listen to this well outside our area, even outside of our state, which we've had feedback before, which is really cool. But and here in our, like you and I here in Southern Ohio, volleyball coaches are very specialized. Think about some of the best volleyball coaches around, and they don't coach even a second or third sport.
Right.
They're very specialized. They coach volleyball year round. They coach in the club volleyball scene. Then they coach some of their off season, and I'll grant you, maybe they use it. Maybe there is some personal involvement there in terms of it's their way of getting to coach a couple of their kids in the off season, or future players. Even if they're at younger
Right.
levels, it builds
Right.
their little league as well. But again, what's happening in that volleyball community is they're creating a lot of volleyball coaches that then branch out and are coaching a lot of these different things. That's a sport where you get a little bit less of the parent involvement. Now, I bet you as you get into the schools and you start to see individual little league teams, I would assume you're going to find one of two things, and tell me if I'm off on this, Matt. Either going to find a parent, or you're going to find a really, really young graduate that just probably played in the program within the last year or two, right?
Right. Yeah.
Either way, there's probably a little bit of lack of training, as you're saying. So as you get into those things, don't you feel like the ultimate focus has to be on helping prepare and helping train those that are willing to get involved and play? I guess that's the number one star I had in my notes down here is, what are we doing to help train and prepare and help these people along the process of coaching?
That's exactly what I was saying, because I think, how many varsity coaches, everybody's been guilty of it. From time to time, like, oh, we got the youth program ready to roll this year. Good. Do we have someone to coach third grade? Yeah, Mr. Johnson's going to coach. Okay, good. Yeah. Let him coach third grade.
Yeah.
And we don't know whether Mr. Johnson knows a basketball from tennis ball. We're just saying that we're going to let this guy coach third grade. It brings me to the thing you mentioned briefly, Shayne, about the dads too, because obviously when you get these volunteers at younger levels, some of them are going to be parents. Most of them are going to be parents, because who wants to really pour their time into something if their kid's not, because you're busy, right? It's hard to coach something if your kid's not involved, because then you're coaching this, your kid's involved in something else, or man, I used to do that when I had kids. Now I want to travel with my wife. I don't want to mess with that, whatever. So usually it's when your kids are involved. That podcast I was talking about, Hank Haney was extremely critical of dad coaches. Okay. And I thought that's where the unfair part came in a little bit. I think there are parents that coach that do a good job trying to separate, their own kid from what they're trying to accomplish. Now, look, again, honest conversation, right? It starts with like being completely transparent. I think the first thing we all have to admit, if a parent is coaching their kid is their favorite kid. Okay. They love their kid more than anything in this world. All right. And any parent that says, oh, I love all 8 of these kids. No, you don't. I mean, you don't. You love your kid the most. All right. It's just the way it is. But are you professional enough, or are you level-headed enough to separate your feelings for your kid? And this is something that I've tried very, very hard to do since I started coaching my son. And I don't know whether I've done a good job. Maybe you could ask some people whose kids have been on our team. I'd like to think I've done pretty well with this, but it's separating the dad from the coach. I think it's important to kind of have boundaries and kind of have some rules set up with your own kid, And one thing I've always told my son is, listen, I'm not going to give you preferential treatment. I'm not going to hit you clean up if you deserve to hit seventh. I'm not going to start you on the basketball team if you're our 10th best player. It's just not going to work that way. In fact, on our basketball team, my son probably averaged about a quarter of the minutes as our best players did last year. Probably played about a fourth of the time because that's where he was in the rotation. He wasn't good enough to be one of those top two players in that sport. In baseball, he's a kid that hit sixth. By the end of the season, did he deserve to hit fifth or fourth? Maybe, because he came on, had some good numbers. But, we didn't do that, kind of kept him where he was because team chemistry and those other guys were sort of in those spots and kind of solidified and all that. So I've told him a million times, I'm not going to give you preferential treatment, but, and here's the thing that's a big but, I'm also going to try not to treat you any harder, like be any tougher on you than I am all the other kids. And I think sometimes dads have a really hard time with that, Shayne, or moms, or whoever coaching their kid, right? It's really easy to come unglued on your own kid if you're not careful. And I tried not to do that. There's so many times I'll start to get on Brogan, my younger son, and I'll think, would I yell at another kid this way? Or would I get on another kid the same way? And I've made mistakes with it. Trust me. Listen, we're not perfect, right? I had a meltdown on my son in the batting cage last year that I would have never in a million years had a meltdown on another kid. We have our moments, okay? But what I'm saying is I think ultimately we have to try to treat our kids the same on both ways, right? I'll give you another example. I'll turn it over to you. One of Hank Haney's things, he was criticizing parent coaches really badly on the show. And then all of a sudden he talked about another parent who had a stud hockey player, like easily the best player on the team. Like he said, it wasn't even close. You ask any parent who the best player on the team is, this kid right here. Well, his dad had to fill in and coach one game. Okay, his dad was not normally the coach. He had to fill in to coach. He didn't start his son. He goes, "No, this kid's the best kid on the team," and he didn't start his own kid. And I had a lot of respect for that. I thought that really, I don't have a lot of respect for that. I mean, maybe respect's not the right word. Why aren't you starting your best player? You see what I'm saying? So now he's treating his kid differently, but you respect it because he's punishing his kid. You know what I mean? You're mad at the dad who plays their kid who's not good enough to play, but you applaud the dad who's got the best player on the team that doesn't play his kids. See, that doesn't make sense to me, right? I think that we have to, as a parent coach, we have to go both ways on that. We don't favor our kid, but we're not going to punish our kid extra either just because he's our kid. That can be tough sometimes.
I would almost throw this to you as both a parent and a coach. I'd be interested to see if you could separate the two in answering it. Maybe you can, but common sense tells us when you take all the little league and a smaller percentage of that will go to junior high, a smaller percentage of that will make the JV team, a smaller percentage of that will be a varsity player.
Right. It keeps going down, dwindling. Yeah.
Smaller all league, and then college, and then obviously up to the professional level. So what I would back all the way up to, especially at the little league level, if that's what we're really talking about here, we're certainly talking about some sort of level shy of organized school activity, I assume. What really is the most important? Like when you see your kid go and play a little league sport, are are you wanting them to learn skills at an elite level? Are you wanting them to learn strategy? Or are you wanting them to learn what it's like to be a teammate? Are you wanting them to understand, like I think of our dad as a junior high basketball coach for 2 decades. The number one thing once I became a coach, I look back and I respected the most is kids came out of his program, no matter what X and O or whatever skill they ever learned, whatever. They understood for an hour and a half, this is a serious work ethic. You come in and you play hard, right? You listen to your coaches and you work hard. So like I think back to those foundation pieces. What are we really talking about? Are we looking first and foremost for someone who can come in and properly teach a kid to block or tackle in football, to teach a kid to catch it and throw it and run in baseball, or handle it and play defense and shoot it in basketball? what is the priority when you start to look down into the little league level as a dad or even as a varsity head coach who's trying to put together a foundation program?
For me, Shayne, it's always been like this. Okay. And again, I try to coach youth sports the way I would want somebody to coach my kid in youth sports. All right. But like for me, the number one thing is all at that age is always trying to teach somebody how to be a good teammate. I think that's such a valuable lesson. Okay. I see things in youth sports all the time. I I can remember one year my kid was almost in tears because a kid on the team said to him, this is a few years ago, "You're the worst player on the team." And he got in a car and he's like, Dad, he's kind of sucking up the tears. And I'm like, listen, you know, and I used it as a teaching moment for him. I was like, there's going to come a day where you're one of the better players. How are you going to treat the kid who's not as good? You know, and because right now you're younger and he's better, and it'll change, and you try to teach him how to be a teammate. It's the one thing I told my son: when a kid scores a run, I want you jumping up and slapping him on the helmet, hugging him up. If a kid makes a nice play, because I think that's important to teach a kid how to appropriately celebrate with a teammate. Instead of the bat flip and pointing at the other dugout and talking trash, how about we celebrate with our own teammates? You know what I'm saying? And that's what I want to teach him. I want to teach him how to listen to a coach. And even if you disagree, to keep your mouth shut, do what you're told to do. um, all these things I think that I try to teach him, I want to teach all the kids that. That's one of the things when I coach, I really try to teach kids to be a good teammate. I've taken kids out of the game before and I've said, listen, I won't take you out very often for a physical mistake or not playing well. We don't do that, But you want to act like an idiot. You want to treat somebody badly. You can sit over here for a little while, So I think that goes for all the kids I coach. I want to teach that. Let's face it, Shayne, we're still teaching that at the high school level sometimes too, right? Sometimes on how to be a good teammate. That's not something you stop teaching. You can make the argument that the college coaches are working with guys on how to be a good teammate, all the way up to professional level. But for me, that's the number one. Now, number two, and then I want to get your thoughts. I'm going to give you three things. Number two, for me, is skill at the younger levels. Like you've got to at least be able to teach some skill development. I mean, if not, kids are wasting their time. I mean, you got to be able to run a practice and have reps, right? Like enough reps. Like you can't hit a kid 4 ground balls and say, okay, we got our work in tonight. And that's where that line of 11 kids comes into play, right? You don't have time. You've got to be able to hit a kid, hey, we're going to get you 25 ground balls in the next, 10 minutes. You got to figure out ways to do this. They need reps. So I like for a coach to be able to teach a skill and get kids to be better. And then it's okay to, after that, to look at the winning. I don't want to win at all costs, but I don't think there's anything wrong with teaching a kid once you're in the game, let's compete to win. Let's try to win. It's okay. If we don't win, we're going to shake the other team's hand. We're going to be a good sport about it. But while we're here, since we're keeping score, let's try to win. But again, not at all costs. I'm not going to try to win a Pee Wee basketball game by sitting my 5 worst players on the bench the whole game and never putting them in for 1 minute. Not going to happen. Not at this age. Everyone's going to play. Does everyone have to play equally? No, because that's not fair to the kids who work really hard to become good players, right? We don't play equally, but everybody's got to play at that age, right? It's not a win at all cost to where, it shouldn't be. But anyway, so I would say teammate, skill development, and then it's okay to teach a kid the right way to compete and try to win.
I think that's interesting. I was jotting those down as you went there, so I'll just kind of repeat and comment as we go. The number one thing with teammate I think is fascinating because I think today's kids are growing up in a culture that is much um, more difficult to think of it from a team perspective, right? It's and I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I just think it's a cultural thing in terms of personal brand, and you see all these different athletes and the different things as they go. But like one of my favorite things is like, let's face it, one of the things we've loved Cincinnati Reds our entire life, but one things you're drawn to on this particular team is it is obvious when they play well or when they play absolutely horrible that they like one another.
Right.
You know what I mean? That they are invested in it for one another. So I love what you're saying. I think some people don't realize that that is a skill. Like we do, we have PACT in our program at Pain Valley, Pride, Attitude, Class, and Talent. And we drill those things the same way I would teach someone to field a ground ball. I teach them how to strike out. I
Right.
teach them how to score a run. I teach them how to
Right.
act in the dugout when this happens. And we are very intentional. We're very
Right.
purposeful in our leadership. Did I know that my first 2, 3 years in coaching? No, not really. But then I started to realize that, wait a minute, this kid's a pretty good player. He has a pretty good attitude, but he doesn't quite know how to do this.
Right.
You know what I mean? So after a while, I started to realize that, man, you can teach a lot of these things. I agree
I
with
mean,
what you're
Shane,
saying.
real quick, I can remember going to watch Ben Hartsock practice at Ohio State. Okay, years ago, we got to go up and watch him practice. I mean, that's been a long time ago now. And Jim Tressel ran a. You're talking about a national championship level team here. Okay, he ran a drill in practice where they hand the ball off, they score a touchdown against no defense, just naked or however you want to call that, dry run. Okay, and hand the ball to the ref. That was the whole drill. Hand off, run into the end zone, hand the ball to the official. And they did it for like 10 minutes. And that was his way of teaching them, here's how we're going to act when we score. We're not going to
Hmm.
act like an idiot. We're going to score and hand the ball to the official. But anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it just
No,
reminded me of that.
no, I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, again, you're talking about the highest level of college
Right.
athletics when you start talking that, and it is an expectation of how we're going to act and how we're going to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. Now, I agree with the skill level. I think that's where the organization comes into play, and that's why I say sometimes it's not even the knowing exactly what you're doing as much as it is being a willing learner and being willing to go do it. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's I agree with you in terms of the repetition and having enough knowledge and base to be able to put those proper things. And then I don't disagree with all what you're saying about winning. I think that um, look, I'm a firm believer. I was junior high athletic director for just shy of a decade, and so I watch a lot of seventh and eighth grade volleyball and football and basketball, and I would even see cheerleading squads do different things. I would see wrestlers do anything, and here's the common thread all the way down into the little league. The kids who have the most talent win.
Right.
You know what I'm
Right.
saying? As much as I hate to burst the bubble of our little league coaches out there that are
Right.
hanging their fifth grade banners in their gym, or maybe in their den at home, um, it's probably not you. You see what I'm saying? It's one
Right.
of those things that where I bet you literally 95% of the junior high games I've ever watched, guess who wins?
Yeah.
The team with the most talent. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So it really is about basing it on being a great teammate, getting skill work, teaching the fundamentals, doing all those things. And as Nick Saban always said, the process, right, will lead
Right.
to the end result of what you want. And I'm not saying that those things aren't important. I'm just saying that what happens is when you're not winning the junior high game because of some strategical play you're
Right.
running. You know what I
Right.
mean? There's a good chance that your players are better than the other team's
Right.
players.
And maybe
So,
maybe you've helped skill develop. Maybe that helps a
I,
little bit, but it's
no
not because
question.
you drew up a great play or right. Right.
Right. Right. Yes, I'm glad you said that. It may be because you made their skill better, but
Right.
it's because your kids are better than theirs.
Right.
I would even argue up to the varsity level and into college. I mean, think about it. Why when Ohio State goes out in their non-league and plays some directional school, why do they win? Well,
Right.
because they recruit better players. You know what I'm
Right. Yeah.
saying?
Yeah.
They they
That's it.
they recruit a lot of guys that are going to play in the NFL, and the other team doesn't or
Right.
can't.
It's
You know what I
that.
mean?
It's
So
yeah.
so I guess that's the foundation of what I would say is all the way back to the concepts of what you're saying. I think winning can be important in the process of teaching kids how to compete correctly. I like what you said about learning how to lose as well. I think that's important. But yeah, I have no trouble in terms of teaching kids um, how to win, the intangibles that go into winning, and I think that does start at a really young age. I do. I think it starts with a competitive edge, and it's so hard to get kids to see it through a team concept. So the earlier you can do that, the better off you are. So Matt, I guess what I would say, and this kind of would lead into my final comment, and I'll kind of comment, question, and let you have the last word. You look at it from top leadership. When I think of, superintendent or principal or athletic director, maybe even down to the head coach, it's kind of like in the professional sports scene. That's kind of our version of ownership, GM, head coach, right? It's,
Right.
when you look down the ranks, I've always said I feel strongly about it's so important for us to give the resources necessary. So like if I'm a principal and I'm on the DLT, for people that aren't familiar with education, that's our district level team. A lot of our job on that committee is to see what resources do our buildings need to be successful. What
Right.
what do our teachers need in the math department to best implement these particular strategies so that our kids can learn? So it's maybe it's training. Like I've heard some schools paying for certification for coaches, or trying to take some things off their plate. You mentioned offering coaching clinics. Maybe it's because a lot of schools, this isn't just a little league thing. This is all the way up into our varsity head coaches. I mean, some schools that, like, pay a varsity assistant like $700-800 or whatever. You know what I mean, for the amount of work they put in. But a lot of them is just volunteer. So I guess what I would ask you is, those are some of the things that come to my mind, because I always like to have a solution based thing here on the podcast. But you have even more experience than I do in this area. And your final comment, or in answering that question, what can the top down do to make it better, to strengthen the types of people that we get in? Because let's face it, the little league culture isn't going anywhere. We,
Right.
we we are an accelerated society. As I said, we're a distracted society. We're a gotta have it now. We're a microwave, not a crock pot. Gotta have it now. So with that in mind, we have no choice but to dive into this and to be better at it. How can we be better at it?
Well, I think from a school level, Shayne, if we're talking about youth sports that are under a school umbrella. Okay. And I get that schools are going to say, well, that's youth sports. We don't sponsor that. I get that, but they're wearing the name of your school across
That's
their
a cop
shirt.
out. That's a cop out.
Right. Exactly. They're wearing the name of our school across the shirt. They're using your facilities. Okay. So in that sense, they're yours. And I think we all need to do a better job of investing in those people. And it's not always financial investment. In fact, I think rarely it is. I think it's more at that level time investment of being able to train these coaches. I go back to the training, okay? Like we use a thing called Coach's Tool Chest. I don't want to just give free commercial here, but we use this thing with our high school coaches where it takes about an hour once a year to complete. You got to do it every year for about an hour. And it takes, I mean, it encompasses everything, from how to treat kids to medical stuff, obviously, and how to, you know, and it helps train a coach. Is it perfect? Well, no, but it's good. It's an hour a year. It's not a huge commitment. It's like $49, which, you know, uh, obviously we pay for that here and try to help our coaches out. But like you could even, I mean, a school could make a pretty small investment, I would think, a couple $100, and you could train your coaches, your youth coaches, for basketball, maybe another couple hundred, you train your football youth coaches or whatever. Make them go through that training. Say, hey, listen, if you're going to do this, we need you to dedicate an hour to this. Sit down at a laptop, knock this thing out for us. I'm not saying you have to go have them licensed by the state of Ohio, but at least sit down and do this, right? And then I think we need to put some onus on our head coaches. Being a head coach myself, I'm not afraid to say this. We should take a little bit more time with our youth coaches and training them. Well, how hard is it to give a 1-day Saturday coaches clinic to where you let them watch you practice, show them some drills, show them some skill development, but then also talk to them about your expectations. Like, listen, here's what I want you saying in the locker room to your kids. Here's how I want you addressing your kids in the locker room. Here's how I'm wanting you to address your kids during a timeout or a huddle. Here's what we expect your kids to treat each other, or how we expect your kids to treat each other. See, how fair is it for us to sit back and criticize a guy if we've never told him how to do it? I mean, that's just not right, Shayne. So I guess before I give my final thoughts, I'll throw it back to you in a minute. But like That's what I would say the school's responsibility is.
Yeah, there's no question. I completely agree, and I just that's why I wanted to get your take on that. I feel like there has to be an opportunity for people to learn and for people to get involved and for us to give those resources. Is it facilities? Is it scheduling? Is it equipment? Is it some different things beyond just what you're saying there?
Mhm.
I think we've all been in situations where there's nothing more frustrating than you're trying to do a job and you don't have the resources to do it. So all
Right.
of those things are checklist type things I had down my list here, but I think but there has to be an involvement, because I guess my final thought is I've always come back to the fact that education is, I believe in the student athlete, but I believe in the student athlete. I think,
Right.
let's face it, a lot of kids that are involved in extracurricular activities, their attendance is better at school, their behavior is better at school, their academic performance is better than school. And so it's all a part of the educational process. I don't want to be so naive to think that they're going to learn everything they need to learn in science, right? I think
Right.
they also need some art class, they need some music class, but they also need some sort of extracurricular activity. And for us to offer all the extracurricular activities we need to, we're going to have to go outside of our school's ability to employ and staff and have volunteer help. And in getting that volunteer help, we need to have great selection process. We need to have great resources in place to help them become a part of our team. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any final word here? I certainly don't want to cut you off before
Well,
I get
I
us
would
out of
just
here.
say this. I think the thing I would say last is this, it's tough to coach. It is a tough gig. Okay.
Mhm.
And on all honesty, it's somewhat tougher in some ways. It's tougher to coach youth sports than it is high school sports, to be
No
honest with you.
question.
I
No
mean, now there are
question.
some things in high school dealing with media pressure and all the things that go with it. But in a lot of ways, coaching youth sports can even be more difficult. And coaching your own kid, right? We go back to the dad coach thing, can be difficult. I guess my advice would be, we've already talked about it with the schools and the head coaches. We need to do a better job of preparing our youth coaches. But I think my advice to the youth coach would be, it's also your job to seek help. We live in a society where there's a lot of help. There's YouTube videos of college coaches going through things, and how hard is it anymore to reach out to a head coach you have respect for, even if it's not the one at your school, just another head coach, be like, hey, what would your advice be here? Or reach out. I reached out to a guy the other day that I think does a great job with youth sports. I've watched him coach his kids. And I said, hey, what advice would you have, like with because I've coached for a long time, but I've only coached youth sports for a few years, right? So I'm still reaching out and saying, oh, how do you handle this with 10-year-olds? I know I handle it this way with 16-year-olds, but how do you handle it with 10-year-olds? And, so why don't
Mm.
you seek some advice too? And I think ultimately, make sure that you're coaching for the right reasons. If you're a dad coach, don't coach just to sweeten your own kid's pot, right? I mean, coach to for the right reasons. Coach to help all the kids. Coach to do it the right way and take pride in doing it the right way.
I love that, because I've always said, in the small school setting, at least, maybe it's not this way in the big school, but in the small school setting, if you're a parent that is involved and you are coaching it for the right reasons, you may have all the flaws in the world when it comes to the X's and O's or even skills or different things. But if you're coaching for the right reasons and you're bringing people along, you can impact a class that will be a part of that school's athletic program
Right.
for years and years to come. So that's good stuff. So, well, Matt, on that note, another good show 56, put a wrap on it. Thanks as always, Dr. Chris Good. And I look forward to getting back at it as soon as possible, but make sure you're checking us out wherever you get your podcast. If you get the audio side, you'll find Expanding the Zone, or check us out on YouTube, SBC Sports Zone. So, Matt, on that note, a lot of fun. We'll see you next time. Appreciate you listening here on Expanding the Zone.